dragon. A goat, 7 horns. Total destruction. Rebirth, a new heaven, a new earth. Revelation has it all. Come join me as I take a walk through the book of Revelation and see what was on John's mind in the island of Patmos. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another episode of Coffee, the Bible, and Paige. I am Paige, your caffeine-imbued host. And here's my caffeine. In the beginning, coffee. And lo, it was very good. Well, today's episode is going to be concerning basically one verse out of Revelation chapter 12 verse 3. Then another sign appeared in heaven. An enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. This one verse was used by God to take me down a really interesting journey as I prepared all week on this. And I always find it amazing how one verse can take me all over the place like this one did. And the journey revolves around what this symbology means. In other words, a big red dragon. He has 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns on its heads. It took me down the road of considering 2 primary points of view. The premillennialist point of view and the amillennialist point of view. There was a time when I considered discussing premill versus amill is kind of foolish and a waste of time. I've changed my opinion. These are important things to consider. And I'm going to do my best to interpret what this symbology means within the context of those 2 points of view. So let's get started. Well, the dragon here in Revelation 12:3 recalls Old Testament imagery of Leviathan, the primordial sea monster that symbolizes chaos, evil, and the enemies of God. In texts such as Psalm 74:13 and 14, Isaiah 27:1, Ezekiel 29:3, Leviathan is portrayed as a monstrous creature that is subdued by God, representing his power to conquer cosmic and political forces of disorder. Revelation draws upon this imagery to depict the dragon as the ultimate cosmic adversary, an embodiment of satanic rebellion and opposition to God's kingdom. Now, later on in this chapter, this dragon is explicitly identified as Satan, described as the great dragon, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He is the same being who appeared in Eden as a deceiver and who now stands behind the great systems of evil at war with the people of God. The 7 heads, the 10 horns, the 7 crowns worn by this dragon are not merely decorative. They are loaded with symbolic meaning. 7 is the number of completion. Therefore, the 7 heads of this dragon suggest a false or corrupted sense of completeness, possibly representing the fullness of the deceptive wisdom, or perhaps 7 historic empires used by Satan. The 10 horns echo the prophecy of Daniel 7, signifying political or military power, likely referring to a confederation of rulers or nations aligned against God's purposes. The 7 crowns indicate a claim to global authority, complete authority, kingship, a counterfeit sovereignty that mimics the true rule of Christ. The 7-headed dragon with 7 crowns and 10 horns therefore represents a complete, unified enemy of God, represented by a globally unified entity. This imitation is even more evident when compared with the Lamb of Revelations 5:6, who stands at the center of the heavenly throne, If you remember, it said, "Then I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne. The lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes." Now, where the lamb has 7 horns, symbolizing perfect power, complete power, and 7 eyes, symbolizing perfect and complete omniscient vision through the Spirit of God, the dragon boasts 7 heads and 10 horns as a twisted mirror of this, of God's divine attributes. This contrast reveals the dragon as a counterfeit Christ, attempting to usurp God's throne and to deceive the nations through a parody of true superiority and authority. Thus, the dragon's appearance in Revelation 12 is not random, but deeply theological. It holds meaning for us. It presents Satan as a monstrous imitation of Christ, cloaked in borrowed symbols of power, wisdom, and dominion, but destined for defeat at the hands of the true king. Now, let's look at the dragon in more detail. As John gazes into the heavens in Revelation 12, another sign appears before him. Stunning, terrifying, and loaded with meaning. It's a dragon, enormous and blood red, a creature of nightmare and symbol. But this is no mythical beast drawn from imagination. John tells us exactly who it is in verse 9, as I said before. This is the ancient serpent, called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. This is Satan, the arch enemy of God, humanity. The one who first appeared in the garden as a serpent now emerges in full form as a cosmic adversary. No longer whispering temptations in a garden. He now wages open war in the heavens and on earth. The dragon embodies everything Satan is: chaos, rebellion, deception, death. He is the great opposer of God's kingdom, the leader of a long war against the Creator and his people. Now, the fact that he's red, well, this is a color steeped in symbolism throughout Scripture. Red conjures the image of bloodshed and war, like the red horse in Revelation 6 that brings conflict and violence to the earth. This is no passive creature. His intent is murderous, especially toward Messiah, the child born of the woman, and toward the faithful people of God. He is bloodthirsty, determined to devour. But it's the details of his appearance that demand closer attention. He has 7 heads, a grotesque exaggeration of the intelligence and dominion of God. In biblical imagery, the number 7 usually symbolizes perfection or completeness. Here, it's twisted. The dragon's 7 heads reflect a corrupt form of completeness, a counterfeit of divine wisdom and rule. These heads may also represent maybe 7 empires or rulers through which Satan has exercised authority, echoing the monstrous beasts of Daniel 7. Now, these heads had 7 crowns, symbols of kingship. But these are not the crowns of rightful rule. They are marks of usurped authority, stolen power, and of false sovereignty. Satan mimics God, claiming rulership over the world, but it's all a charade, a global counterfeit kingdom that pales before the true King of Kings. Now, from his 7 heads springs 10 horns, symbols of might, power, political force. In both Daniel and Revelation, horns represent kings or kingdoms, and 10 often implies a full set, a complete confederation. The 10 horns likely stand for a coalition of nations or rulers under Satan's influence, wielding military and political power to persecute the people of God. Again, we hear the echo of Daniel 7, where a great beast with 10 horns arises from the sea. Put together, the dragon's form reveals a chilling portrait. A global, deceptive, violent power claiming authority that does not belong to it and using every means, spiritual, political, and military, to wage war against God's people. And there's more. There's a fake trinity. This dragon's not working alone. We're going to find out in the next chapters as the narrative unfolds. We learn that he stands at the head of a counterfeit trinity. Revelation 13, he gives his power to a beast that rises from the sea, and another beast rises from the earth, what many call the false prophet. Together, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet form a blasphemous imitation of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It is Satan's attempt to replicate God's glory, to offer a false salvation, and to deceive the nations. We'll talk more about this later. But the two prevailing viewpoints for interpreting Revelation, that is, amillennialism and premillennialism, will view this imagery in two ways. The premillennialists will see this dragon as an embodiment of a future literal world leader accompanied by his two associates, a false prophet and someone called the beast. This unholy trinity sneaks its way into prominence and domination before revealing its true colors in what is called the Great Tribulation. The amillennialist, on the other hand, views the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet as being at work in the world now, gaining prominence throughout history, with each generation seemingly giving rise to its version of the Antichrist, as the intensity of the persecution of the church increases until the Lord returns. Amillennialist sees all of this not as a 7-year event called the Great Tribulation, but as an epochal event, with its beginnings rooted in the first century after the resurrection of Christ. But no matter which view you hold to, here is the one thing that all can agree on. Satan, with all his crowns, horns, and schemes, cannot change this one truth. The dragon's authority is limited. He is powerful, yes, but not sovereign. His dominion is temporary, yes, but his rebellion will be crushed. This vision in Revelation 12 is not just a fantasy. It's a heavenly unveiling of real spiritual war. It reminds us that behind the turmoil of nations and the suffering of saints lies a deeper battle. But it also assures us that the dragon will not prevail, for the Lamb has already triumphed. Now, I've got a table here that shows the summary of the symbolism involved here. The dragon, ancient enemy, a deceiver, persecutor. Red means bloodshed, war, destruction. 7 heads, well, that represents corrupt wisdom, counterfeit completeness, world-spanning influence. The 10 horns represents earthly power and strength, possibly 10 kingdoms. And the 7 crowns represent false sovereignty, usurped authority. Now, we're going to take a look at premillennialism and amillennialism. It's an important discussion to have with this. But what Revelation is telling us, and will continue to tell us, is that evil is organized, it is strategic, and globally influential, but it's also defeated. This dragon is not just a random symbol of evil, it is the central antagonist in redemptive history. The dragon's doom is certain because of Christ's victory. Now, let's take a look at the pre-mill and all-mill as they approach this vision. The pre-mill and all-millennial views of this book of Revelation represent two very different approaches to interpreting the millennium mentioned in Revelation. And while it may seem like a senseless exercise to compare these two views, rest assured, how you interpret Revelation within these two theological frameworks will have a great deal to do with how you live your current life. The pre-mill view is that all of Revelation is on a linear timeline, much of which is still to unfold. There will be the rapture of the church, followed by a tribulation period of 7 years, where Satan's primary representatives, the Antichrist, the beast, and the false prophet, mimicking the Holy Trinity, will rule and rain destruction on God's creation until the return of Christ, which will be followed by a 1,000-year literal reign of Christ on earth, which will be followed by Satan's last gasp at defeating God. At that point, Satan will face his final judgment, will be relegated to the lake of fire for eternity, and the final judgment of humanity will then take place. The amillennial view says that all of Revelation is symbolic. Therefore, the tribulation period is representative of the suffering of the Christian church from its inception in the first century until the return of Christ for the final judgment. They believe we are now living in what Revelation calls a tribulation, which in their eyes represents an ongoing, ever more malevolent march by Satan for global domination, with the destruction of the church and the usurpation of God's throne as its primary goals. The end of both views is the same. Satan is destroyed, and a new heaven and a new earth are born. Now, of the 2 points of view, I believe the amillennialist perspective is more consistent. It views everything from chapter 3 on as symbolic and interprets everything we read in that context. The premillennialist, again in my point of view, has the more difficult job of interpreting Revelation, as he or she must bounce back and forth from what is to be interpreted literally and what must be interpreted figuratively. That is not to say one point of view is necessarily more accurate than the other. There are brilliant Bible scholars on both sides of this issue. Currently, I am standing on the side of amillennialism, but as I said before, this is not a hill I will stand on and fight to the death for. This is a very recent change of position for me, and I am still, quite frankly, wrestling with it. Now, I have here a chart that represents both points of view. On Christ's return, the premillennial believes that Christ returns before the millennium. That's premillennial. The amillennial says Christ returns after the symbolic millennium, which is where we're living now. The events in Revelation, in the premillennial point of view, is more literal, especially of prophecy and chronology, where amillennial says it's all symbolic and allegorical, which is the point of apocalyptic imagery. The millennial kingdom, well, at the end of Revelation, it describes a future literal kingdom on earth. The amillennial believes that the millennial kingdom is symbolic of Christ's current reign from heaven. Satan's binding. He'll be bound one day. Well, the premill says that's a future event when Satan will be literally bound. And the amillennialist says that Satan is currently being restrained from deceiving nation. It's happening now. He's being bound. The resurrection. Well, there's two separate resurrections before and after the millennium, where the amillennialist says one general resurrection at Christ's return, and the tribulation, well, that's a future period of intense suffering before Christ returns in the premill view. And the amill view says it's symbolic of church age suffering and persecution, which we're living in now. The nature of the millennium, well, in the premill view, that's earthly, political, physical kingdom ruled by Jesus. The amillennial view says that's a spiritual reign of Christ in believers and the church happening today. Now, I made the statement that what you believe about these 2 points of view has a great deal to do with how you might live your life as a Christ follower. This is the part that God really bore down on me to consider. Let's start with the amillennial view first. The amillennial view of history since the first century especially is the ever-evolving, ever-shifting efforts of Satan at global domination. His efforts at destroying the church are also evolving, constantly getting more efficient and more nefarious. Every generation seems to have its version of an antichrist. The Hitlers, the Stalins, the Mao Zedongs. Somewhere on the globe, his work at destroying the church is on display, seemingly getting more and more effective. In my opinion, it will only get worse. Someday, when that is Satan's deception and power, are at their apex, God will appear, and everything will be put right. Now, if this is your point of view, then your approach to your day-to-day living as a disciple of Christ is full of urgency, full of determination to live your life honoring Christ, realizing the depth of the struggle you're involved in. Living a life of holiness means something to you as you realize this life is a struggle with immense consequences. You're a warrior, like the one in Ephesians 6, going head to head with the enemy's demonic minions, fighting for your family's honor and position in God's kingdom. Your view of living in this world is that of Peter the Apostle, where he announces we're ambassadors of God's kingdom, currently living in a kingdom that considers us as hostiles. The battle of all eternity is happening now, not in some future 7-year period, which you will not see due to the rapture. Now, premillennialism, well, if you hold to that point of view, you'll view today's world as a transitional period where Satan is yet to be allowed full sway, where it's not as bad as it will be after the church is raptured. Truly, all that's required of you is that you be in a spiritual position such that when that rapture trumpet sounds, you will be snatched up in the air into heaven, escaping the unfettered wrath of the enemy of our souls, Satan. Now, the danger in this point of view, don't shoot me, is that in my opinion, it encourages the possibility of a minimal approach to Christ-like behavior and living. For lack of better terminology coming to mind, some are looking to be barely saved, just enough saved that they will be snatched away when the rapture trumpet sounds. But herein lies the danger. There's no degrees of salvation. There's no barely being saved. There is saved, and there is unsaved, period. I know. This is a huge generalization. In truth, there are a large number of people that I know personally who hold to the premill position, that live truly godly lives and take their relationship with Jesus seriously. I've had dinner with people from both sides of this theological divide who are serious about their walk with Christ. In truth, there are true Christ followers on both sides. And unless asked, you won't be able to tell the difference between which are premill and which are amill, just based on their lifestyle. They're pursuing God. I'm going to take this point of view one step further. I contend that some who claim Christ due to a one-time confession in their past and view the rapture as their get-out-of-jail-free card think this permits them to live a life that is slack in the pursuit of holiness, simply due to a one-time profession of faith. I know people like that. They believe they will not be duped by the Antichrist, the beast, and the false prophet because they will not be on earth due to being raptured. In my opinion, the amillennial viewpoint encourages and demands, again, my own opinion, that you aggressively pursue godly living because the followers of Christ are in the thick of the spiritual battle now, whereas the premill view allows for a hang on long enough to be raptured out of all this mess attitude. This is not an approach that encourages the warrior's mindset. It encourages survivor mode, in my opinion, which I believe is a grave deception. Now again, and I hope I make this clear, not all who hold to the premill viewpoint of view are like I just mentioned, but I contend that the premill point of view has the potential of being a breeding ground for this attitude. In my over 50 years of being a Christian, I have seen this again and again in the lives of my fellow churchgoers. And at one point in my life, I held to this point of view. I looked at the rapture of the church and the premill point of view with great relief, knowing that I will be taken away before it gets really, really nitty-gritty. And it's going to deliver me from having to struggle against Satan. Because when Satan is unleashed in the tribulation period, it's going to be rough. But whatever your point of view, true followers of Christ share the same attitude. We are called to be holy as he is holy. We are called to demonstrate our faith openly by loving God with all of our hearts and minds and loving our neighbors as ourselves. We are in a war, fighting an enemy who demands our destruction. We must befit ourselves as warriors. Folks, the dragon with the 7 heads, 7 crowns, 10 horns, is very real. Satan, our adversary, is seeking our destruction. God has a command in his scripture. He says, "Be ye holy, even as I am holy." We are called as God's warriors, as God's ambassadors, as representatives of the heavenly kingdom. We are called to be holy. That's the end game. So whether you believe there's going to be a 7-year tribulation period, a pre-trib rapture, and an amillennial kingdom, or whether you believe that we are right now in the middle of that millennial kingdom, if that point of view is not pushing you to pursue holiness, then you are living in error. I would really look forward to hearing from some of you and your views on what we've just talked about here. But until then, it's a good place to stop. I'm Paige. Here's my coffee. Folks, I'm out of here. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Don't forget to join me at www.patreon.com/coffeebiblepage or my website, www.coffeebiblepage.com. Have a glorious and blessed day. Bye-bye.